the 9th day of October 2022. I'm Dana Durnford. I'm also known as the nuclear proctologist.org. You can call in at 709-589-4406. 709-589-4406. Or you can text me. I hope everybody's doing good on this Sunday night. We got lots and lots of what the hell stories to cover. Look at your wonderful nuclear industry. Your carbon-free nuclear industry. Perpetual lying nuclear industry. Why are they playing around with fusion for 50 years? I got all the brain power, all the precious metals on the planet sucked up. If you put half of the energy into storage for renewables, you can free up the whole planet. Whales won't stop killing themselves in New Zealand. You know why they framed that headline that way in 2018? Because it was really extraordinary. We're all whales. Now, these whales in 2018 were emaciated. And 2017, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, they don't report on the health of the whales. It's very, very unusual to get a clean shot of the whales. These are abnormalities compared to the other years. A little over 2 weeks ago, there was 14 sperm whales washed up and died on the beaches of Australia's King Island, and Tasmania, New Zealand's Macquarie Harbour was over 200 whales had died. Yesterday was 250 whales died in Chatham Islands. We're going to cover that tomorrow night. And last year, Farewell Spit was around 700 whales. There was other strandings that year too. But you can see that pattern where, remember, in 2017 and 18 and 19, they said the whales were emaciated. So this was yesterday. It was very difficult to get any pictures again. From Chatham Island, hundreds of whales. Turns out to be 250. The original headlines were 215. An environmentalist. So nobody on the planet cares about the whale, only scumbag environmentalists is what they're suggesting, right? Roughly 250 pilot whales died after becoming stranded northwest of Chatham Island, which is 800 kilometers away from New Zealand. This picture that they gave us was 2021. Gray whales continue to wash up dead and emaciated. 40% of the gray whales have starved to death since 2016. The last numbers 2 years ago was 7,000. And instead of giving us a number, they said 40%. 40% from the peak in 2016. Argentina has also seen a spat of whales in recent days in Argentina. was 13 southern right whales, and there's totally worldwide somewhere over 300 of them left on the planet. To have 13 of them dying at the one time is extraordinary. Same with sperm whales, it's extraordinary. This we seen it last year in the United Kingdom where they never go. And it was over a dozen. They were confirmed emaciated, by the way. We covered it. And they say here all were well fed. They can't quantify that assertion because the documentation shows that they hadn't done a necropsy on the animals at that point. So the claim that they were all well fed, and we've seen this a lot over the last decade, where they make these claims. There's another story we're going to cover more. Thousands of salmon. Estimated low was 65,000 salmon in British Columbia. The whole coastline is a drought. Now the reason, they say the remains are consumed and redistributed by scavenging bears and wolves and birds and provide nutrients, valuable nutrients for the forest. Well, the reality of it was the birds and the whales, or the wolves and bears, didn't eat them, as you can see. If that was true, they wouldn't have found them, per se. They would have, you know what I'm saying? Now, because the glaciers are gone since Fukushima, several years after Fukushima, glaciers that have been there for millions of years disappeared, which would take tens of thousands of years to come back under perfect conditions. But it was the radiation gets under the ice too, right? And heats up the environment on top of that and causes the global warming. So normally glaciers during droughts will bring enough water down the river so the salmon can get up the river. And not only that, the cold water is regular because it regulates the temperatures of the rivers and the streams, which are failing, even if the salmon get up, are failing because they're too hot, because they don't have water from the glaciers. We'll talk about that tomorrow night. 200 whales... It was more than that, but 200 whales die on an Australian beach in 2000, or this was September the 23rd, right? There was 250 washed up, 30 of them made it off the island, I think it was, which means that's almost 500 whales in the last 2 weeks, counting the sperm whales. And I can guarantee you that they were emaciated. More than a dozen sperm whales, which is on Kings Island, and I started off, I showed you that from a couple of weeks ago. The next day was a couple of 220 died of pilot whales. There are at least 14 carcasses of the sperm whales. It was quite unusual for sperm whales to wash ashore. It's extraordinary. It's never been seen pre-Fukushima in groups like this. So you have them over a very long stretch from the top of Australia to the end of the earth. That's the end of the earth right there, Chatham Island. Right? For the continent. That's obviously off the continent, but it's the most northerly island of the continents, of the Australian continent, I should say. So we're going to cover that tomorrow night. We've got all kinds of other stories. Get your kids some popcorn. It's going to be a great time for everybody. Radiation hotspots in Maralinga. So it's they don't want tourists to spend an hour, more than an hour there, which means normally in a normal world they would say tourists can't go there because they can, after an hour, they're going to exceed any inflated considered safe doses. It's absurd to send people out there and say it's safe for an hour. You're talking about Maralinga, where they've done multiple nuclear tests. And, you know, you got to go 100 miles by boat to get there. You can only spend an hour. The nuclear industry is lunatics. They're really good at destroying everything with radioactive fallout, particularly nuclear power plants. All of them are hemorrhaging radiation from the fuel pools 24 hours a day. Oh, yes. Most of my cough is gone, but not all of it. Because this is day 9. So yesterday morning I had 4 hours sleep or something in a row, which is extraordinary. And same thing last night. And didn't wake up either time having to run to the bathroom. You know, not even for phlegm, right? So that was huge. Ooh, on the road to recovery. And further minor trials. They're talking about over 700 dirty bombs were set off in Australia. Britain went all the way to Australia to pollute Australia. The invisible war. They have the highest cancer rates per 100,000 worldwide. But cancer is just one of 1,800 illnesses you'll get from radioactive poisoning. Because radiation poisoning, you're ingesting physical atoms. This is not like sunshine or something. This is physical atoms that are considered 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. Further minor trials, well, compared to a nuclear detonation minor, but if you go out with one of these minor trials and done it in, say, a city, they will be doing documentaries on dirty bombs that you used. These are dirty bombs. They wrapped uranium, fission uranium, say 235, and fission plutonium, physical amounts, and detonated it with conventional explosives. These are brutal, dirty bombs that contaminated tens of thousands of miles permanently. I can imagine what the airborne done. Imagine naming an island. They set up a nuclear bomb on Alpha Island. If someone says to the nuclear industry, that's too evil, everything in the nuclear industry will try to go and do it. A British atomic weapon was exploded above this point in 1956, and people go there and get their picture taken because they're so dumbed down with Spider-Man and the Hulk. Boris Johnson, who obviously should be arrested for sedition by just importing food from Fukushima for mass murder, for mass disease factory machine. Now, he wouldn't meet with the veterans for 9/10 of his tenure as a demon. Thanks to your efforts all those years ago, more than 67 million people in the United Kingdom. And then why would you talk about NATO? Why would you invoke NATO? He'd like to offer his profound thanks after he's kicked out of office. It's equal to a serial killer tweeting out that, never mind. He'd like to thank the Olympics team for winning the gold medal or something stupid. Well, I mean, Boris Johnson the monster done, is he imported food from 14 prefectures that were banned by 55 countries for 10 years. Not Canada, of course. Canada lifted all restrictions after 93 days. Canada was captured by the nuclear industry. But 55 other countries banned it, which meant Japan could only ship it to Canada because Canada is the only country that didn't have a ban. That's why everybody in Canada is sick, right? And so Boris Johnson, the United States, Biden, the EU, all lifted restrictions in a 12-month period. And so did Taiwan, by the way. The president of Taiwan with a handshake, same as Boris and same as Biden, with the same creature. Well, not the exact same creature. Sugar was last year. It's such a bizarre story. It shouldn't exist, right? Austria challenges EU green nuclear label in court. It's highly unlikely, apparently, that they're going to win it, but that's meant to... that's defeatism, right? Over the decision for the EU. So the EU claimed... you're talking about a lot of people, right? It's like 500 of them voted on it in the EU Parliament or whatever they call it. And it was a 57 to 50 to 53 or something, or 47. Some didn't vote. Whatever the number was, it was something like a 57% voted to call it green, call nuclear green. It was 100% green, what they call greenwashing. The climate ministry said, that frightens me whenever I hear stuff like that, by the way. Climate ministry. European Parliament in July approved a European Union proposal giving a sustainable finance label to investments in gas and nuclear power, sparking claims of greenwashing by environmental, again the word environment, anybody that opposes destroying the planet and the species is an environmentalist. And being an environmentalist in 90% of the time is a big target on your forehead for anybody with inflated authority. Which is, there wouldn't be so-called environmentalists if we had journalists, would there? Environmentalist is somebody who's doing the journalist job because journalists don't exist. There's fake journalism, but there's no actual real journalists. The European Commission has defied protests from green campaigners. They got 1 million labels. Everything is meant to compartmentalize the truth. And dissent in its own ranks to put a green label on gas and nuclear power. It was 100%, one of the most bizarre things imaginable. It was a no-brainer. There's zero possibility that nuclear had green attributes. It's zero. It's the most resource-intensive industry in human history. There's nothing compared to it. And it's a biological chemical weapon. It's constantly hemorrhaging radiation into the environment, which happens to be surrounded by farms. The Alpine nation, Austria, 9 million people, depend heavily on gas, has been fiercely anti-nuclear, aka pro-life, for decades. Anti-nuclear is what they call people they're scared of. An unprecedented vote by population in 1978 prevented its only nuclear disease factory, aka nuclear power plant, meant to be the first of several, from starting operations. Sir, what a stupid thing to have in front of your name. And professor is just right up there too. Rightly argued that it's necessary for Ireland, which where it's illegal to have nuclear power plants, to develop methods of supplying electricity at times when wind and solar. This argument only exists because they have scuttled any possibility of renewables partnering up with compressed air storage or pumped hydro storage or water battery storage type solutions that are being used by the industry, but they're not allowed to use it for the renewable industry. Because then nuclear can't exist, neither can gas, oil, and coal. Remember, last year was 333 nuclear power plants where the renewables came online, versus, which is 291 gigawatts. Half a gigawatt that came online last year was nuclear. Ireland needs to bite the bullet of nuclear energy. Science, October the 6th. The Irish Times, the case for nuclear energy. I apologize to everybody. It's the same old lies. While such reactors undoubtedly are safer than the large installations, there are small modular reactors that don't exist, about which we all have read. There will continue to be a problem with the disposal of radioactive waste. So the fabled small modular reactors. Hi, Stephen. The fabled small modular reactors that don't exist. There's only one with a permit that says you can start thinking about building it, but you still got to fill in all the blank spots. In other words, it's total fiction, which is new scale, right? Terra Power, which is Bill Gates, doesn't have any design that's legal. You got to get the kinks out of it for a decade once you finally build it. It's like the whole story is silly. It's a perfect way of making sure the planet can't have a future. Putting all your hopes and dreams. It's like the same as fusion, right? Well, it'll be fusion or small modular reactors. What about renewables? No renewables. Well, when are they going to build a fusion small modular reactors? Well, when they figure out how to do it. Well, how long have they been at it? Well, they've been at it for 50 or 60 years for small modular reactors, Dana. 50 years for the fusion. In other words, they're not putting. There's no universities working on storage for renewables, but every one of them are working on storage for nuclear. The radioactive waste from the small modular reactor is going to run on MOX fuel. There's 35 times more high-level intermediate waste, which is very dangerous waste we're talking about. There's 30 times more high-level waste, which is absurdly dangerous, and in very tiny amounts, both of them, and 5 times more fuel rods. Because they're so small, they got to use these military graded uranium and plutonium fission products to make it pump out energy. It's a despicable industry. Why look at such a solution requiring considerable investments, undoubtedly encountering significant opposition when there already exist alternatives for additional supply of energy that can be rapidly deployed? Now, they're talking about one relatively easily established possibility is that excess electricity generated during periods of high winds and intense sunshine. It doesn't need high winds and it doesn't need intense sunshine to work, folks. Would be used to generate green hydrogen using electrolysis. Hydrogen is not green, it's the most resource intensive form of energy to produce. The industry is insane, eh? This hydrogen will be stored and used to generate electricity when there's no sun or wind. If you use geothermal and tidal energy, that's both of them are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, guaranteed, predictable for thousands of years. And if you pair that up with wind and solar, which is the way you're supposed to do it, and other renewables, and back that up with compressed air storage. We dig mine shafts and just put compressed air down there with excess energy. Or water batteries where you have two reservoirs and you keep pumping water up to the top one, recycling the water over and over and over. And then rainfall will replenish it naturally after that. And then a second well-tried technology that could be expanded throughout the country is the use of anaerobic digestion to produce biogas, methane, from waste biomaterials. These include agricultural residue, and the methane would be stored and burnt to produce electricity when needed, using existing power stations currently burning natural gas. You can change all gas, oil, and coal plants. Just leave them there, take out the gas, oil, and coal, and put in geothermal. If you had the will, you can dig down deep enough and tap into it 800-900 degrees. The will is not there because it makes nuclear obsolete immediately. The minute you have a successful one, everybody's going to turn on nuclear first. But such technology would require significant government investment. Well, they're talking about putting charges into the ground and storing it in the life forms that live in the ground. If you dig a big mine shaft, you can just compress air down there. Or what they call water batteries, where you have two reservoirs, you pump water up to the top one with extra energy. And if you're going to use significant government investments to come up with that technology, which is what's happening with the fabled small modular reactors, and the fabled, the better chances of finding a mermaid than finding the small modular reactor or the fusion reactors. Wasting, just dreaming and hoping it's going to work somewhere in the future, rather than come up with a solution for storage for renewables. It's so idiotic. It's so pathetic. It's not going backwards. It's trying to destroy the whole system. It's a very effective way, I should say, of destroying the whole system. Youngkin, which is senator in Virginia, I think, is right to bet big on nuclear energy. Yeah, Virginia governor, rather, Glenn Youngkin unveiled the 2022 energy plan, betting big on nuclear energy. Okay. Energy crisis in Europe, as well as record inflation and prices in the U.S. Well, only because you put an embargo against your resources, which was Russia. And by doing that, you have impoverished your whole country now. And parents can't even afford to pick their kids up at school anymore because the gas is so expensive. Because a handful of people decided to put an embargo against their only source of energy. He hopes investing in small modular reactors will help Virginia meet its climate goal. Like these memorandum of understandings for something that don't exist and then exclude stuff that does exist. And then complain, a couple of years down the road, they'll complain again, saying we got to keep nuclear open, we don't got nothing to replace it. Because they put their ass in a sling by investing in something that doesn't exist and probably won't exist, because between 2020 and 2026, there'll be 4,800 gigawatts of renewables, new renewables online, which is the equivalent of all gas, oil, coal, nuclear combined on the planet. In fact, it'll be equal to 5,500 large, not small, but large nuclear power plants coming online in 6 years. Try wrapping your mind around that. Do you think that's going to stop the next year? The only thing is storage, right? And rather than come up with storage, you say, well, we can put deflectors and solar power 500 miles up in space and beam the energy back to the Earth because the sun shines up there all the time. But why not just use the technology that works for 50 years and you don't have to try to stick it on a rocket and punch a hole in the ozone and waste hideous amounts of precious resources to make it work in an environment that is not like they'll put all their money into a fable but nothing into something that works. They'll put all their universities to try to solve it rather than solve something that can be solved easily. It's called shit for brains, right? It's called Scumbag. It's called nuclear industry. Before he became the governor, the Virginia legislation passed the 2020 Virginia Clean Economy Act to set certain clean energy targets, requiring the state to get all of its energy from wind and solar and traditional nuclear power by 2050. But it was banned the year before, right? They removed that, and then they put in saying nuclear was somehow a traditional. This is the industry. It's very dangerous, see? Because it doesn't allow innovation to take place that would solve the problem. My apologies. Next generation nuclear energy that don't exist. So rather than come up with solutions when you need them, they're going to put all their eggs in a basket and hope that it shows up somewhere in the next 20 or 30 years. Long, 2 decades after they need it to come in. Virginia would deploy the nation's first small modular reactors within the next decade. Like, you can't just build it. You got to get the kinks out of it, and you got to redesign it. The engineers got to redesign it. Then you got to build a new one that actually works without the flaws. We should be all in on nuclear energy. The small modular reactors that don't even exist, barely existing on paper. I don't know. I was on the phone yesterday for 2 hours So my voice never really, got the break I should have gave it, which just happens. Now I'm starting to lose my voice. He is right to emphasize the role of nuclear energy in achieving the goals. Not only is nuclear power emission-free, this is a ludicrous assertion. This is a ridiculous assertion. It's hemorrhaging radiation constantly into the environment, particularly from the fuel pools. It's like, oh my God, boy. What are you supposed to do with these people? They don't, I don't even know what they're saying. They're just given this stuff and then they regurgitate it. When you hear carbon-free, that's like, I'm too stupid to tie my own shoelaces. That's what that basically means. They built the tanks in Fukushima to trick you. Think that that's worry about what they might do, not what's happened. There's lots of terrorists in the nuclear industry. So they're going to tell you that man-made nuclear is like a walk in sunshine, like rocks and bananas, potato chips. And they spent decades just taking it, dumping it into the ocean, just driving around, not stopping, which doesn't matter what you do, but it's still to drive around just dumping it off as you're going, doing that for 3 decades, just dumping it into the water, la-di-da-di-da. And as the barrels sink every 33 feet, they're under another 14.5 pounds per square inch. So they rupture at around 200 feet. So carbon-free that the Fukushima victims were able to go back to the graveyards for a day after 7 years. That's pretty cool. What's not cool is it's in a nuclear wasteland surrounded by 1-ton bags of nuclear waste. And they picked up millions and millions and millions. So how many millions and millions, which is 3% of the land. So 30 million to 60 million bags, depending on who you believe. They've dumped it into our oceans, into our rivers, into our estuaries, into the water tables. They send in the homeless and the destitute, the victims of society. They would have all died that day. They dig chemical ponds. These ponds you see to your left is a chemical pond. They dig it out of the ground, destroy it, then chemicals to separate. They evaporate the chemicals. Any birds that land in that pond, they kill it. All the carbon-free equipment, the whole process just to get it to a pellet is terrifying. It's the most resource-intensive thing on the planet to get it to a pellet. It's absurd how much energy goes into it. Then you can't drink the water in any of the communities within hundreds of miles or anywhere else that they've actually been at. This is disgusting when you see stuff like that. They had 50,000 missile silos. Each one of those red circles is a missile silo. So each one of those communities are human shields for the nuclear weapons site, folks. Nuclear is good at one thing. I don't know if you can guess what that is, but they're disease factories is what they are. 3 million children from Chernobyl. Chernobyl was a single reactor. No fuel pools like Fukushima. if you can't go back to your supermarkets and your schools and your graveyards and your homes and your restaurants and your universities and everything else, how can you call that? That's the only one that has those attributes for energy. Then you use all the homeless on the planet. The entire legacy of nuclear is so insidious. It's so revolting. Run away and leave all your pets and animals behind. And call it carbon free. And all the nuclear plants and all the nuclear dumps are hemorrhaging radiation into your environment. Visible snowstorms all day long. There's 1,000 fuel pools worldwide splitting the atoms into your... and then calling it an emission free. Nuclear power is... not only is nuclear power emission free, it can leap tall buildings and run faster than trains. It can solve some of the issues associated with renewables. So when the sun don't shine and the wind don't blow, you would normally just use compressed air storage or pumped hydro or water batteries. No, that don't exist, Dana. The only solution is nuclear. They'll do anything to cut your throat to make a murder machine happy for a day. Nuclear and gas energy needed as renewables is useful as chocolate teapot. If it coming from, why is this always, when it comes from the United Kingdom, it's always just notches higher of evil, of heartlessness? Why is that, I wonder? Australia and New Zealand's notorious for that too. They got something about them that makes them like credit, and they're getting their narratives from professors, right, from universities. That's where they get their narratives to. Might as well close down all the universities. What's the point? Britain needs to wake up and secure new sources of nuclear. Craig Mackinlay, the chairman of the Net Zero Scrutiny Group of MPs. Denounced the past quarter century of UK energy policy as a failure because you didn't build any nuclear reactors. And now that most of the reactors are about to go offline, they got nothing to replace it, so they got to keep them online. You think that's an accident worldwide? That this seems to happen to every single nuclear country? If you don't understand what kind of sedition that really is, you're very fortunate. Must be nice. High prices, which because they put an embargo against your resources known as Russia. Energy insecurity, which is not because of Russia embargoed them, but because they embargoed Russia's commodity. Everybody bought into it too when they said, let's do this and punish Russia. And everybody then couldn't fill up their gas tanks because it was so expensive the next week. And of course, that never stopped. Now the threat of winter blackout because they put an embargo against the only resource of fuel they had, Russia. It's a total shock that everybody worldwide done that, isn't it? Because United Nations and NATO, right? NATO is not even supposed to exist. It was created because of the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union dissolved, cowards, and got rid of the pensions of the entire country like cowards, NATO should have been dissolved. And now look at them. Now they're so evil. They can't exist. They can't do anything without it harming the most vulnerable of society. Because they've been so evil since the Soviet Union time. The world is scrambling for limited international gas because they put an embargo that only harms the most impoverished of each country. They're not going to harm the people that are making the decisions, that are making a fortune, can afford the expensive gas, and it's harming those who are living, the majority of the population are living check to check, and particularly the kids. They're hoping to pick them up when they flop and put them in the military, right? Again, look at this. Relying on renewables is a fool's errand. Great if it's windy and sunny. In other words, there's no storage. And you'll hear them, as you've been around here very long, you'll hear the word batteries all the time, which is literally the stupidest thing imaginable when you have solutions for storage. You have better solutions for power. It's called geothermal. Just dig down under any gas, oil, coal, nuclear plant and tap into the geothermal right underneath it. No more train loads of coal or gas and oil and dirty fuel from the nuclear tart industry. British homes are losing power for up to 3 hours at a time this winter because the government put an embargo against the only source of energy they got. And there's lots of media trying to say that, or imply that Russia put the embargo, but it wasn't Russia who put sanctions. It was Boris Johnson. The war was basically over. Boris Johnson, like, not so quick. Not that he was doing it personally. He's told to do it, right? His comments come as the UK started a licensing round would allow oil and gas companies to search for fossil fuel in the North Sea. Nearly 900 locations been offered for exploration by the North Sea Transition Authority. North Sea Transition Authority. They all probably carry guns. The minute you give them the word authority in their job title, they want a gun too. And immunity. They're stupid, and then there's the nuclear industry and the pro-nuclear community that bought into it, or the majority of people that are pro-nuclear didn't buy into it. They gladly perpetrate the deceit and deception. Yeah, here this story. I don't even know where to start, man. Walk the nuclear waste adventure trail in St. Charles County. The nuclear waste, this is absurdness. The mount you're looking at is the nuclear waste mount. It's the highest point in St. Charles County. The highest point in St. Charles County is a mountain of nuclear waste, folks. And you get liquefaction underneath it, right? Because you put all these layers over it allegedly to stop rain from penetrating it, right? It'll break down in 5 or 6 years because of gamma shines and X-rays and neutron bursts. I mean, normally it wouldn't break down for 20 or 30 years, but you got X-rays and neutron bursts going on there, burying it on site, and then turned it into a park. And once you see the trails, they actually got steps going up the nuclear mount so you get a vantage point. Let's just run through these pictures because it's hard to appreciate evil and stupid combination, but when you see the nuclear industry, it's always prevalent, right? So all these pictures are I zoomed in trying to read what was going on there. I apologize for some of that. Yeah, a lot of that I'm just trying to, because you give you a picture and I'm trying to zoom in and read. And so they got these centers to brag about the legacy, because this is a a Manhattan legacy site. This is my favorite right here. The girl he left behind is still behind him. She's a wow. And he's out there killing other people's children. Somebody's child is out killing other people's child for the retard government. Dawn of the nuclear age, Trinity tests. And all the victims within 100 miles of that dying of endless amount of diseases and illnesses and autoimmune deficiencies. It's up to 1,800 illnesses. The key ingredient. Every facet of the story is kooky. When you look at what they actually got there, you can imagine how much money they put into this little building and this whole site. And then said, oh, yeah, no, go ahead. And before there was a nuclear cleanup site, the place was farmland. It was taken over by the war machine. Enriched uranium, yellow cake from the chain reaction. Well, there's two yellow cakes from the industry, right? There's one from the mining, the finished product after all the chemicals, and you mine it and you crush it, and then to extract it, you got to use seriously brutal chemicals that are all evaporated into the environment. None of them are put on toxic waste sites. They're all vented into the community. Or hopefully you have big rains there and it washes it out, and so the mining company don't have to pay for storage for thousands of years. Beyond the Welcome Center is a large mound that looks like it's made out of rocks. It's the largest peak in St. Charles County. It's a nuclear dump. They just dumped it all on site and built the earth berm on top of it. That, like, the material you're using ain't gonna protect it because of the gamma shines, the X-rays, the neutrons, right? There's no checks and balances, so evil just has taken over our planet, and it's called the nuclear industry. Jacob Rees-Mogg, keen to see Copeland, United Kingdom. Cumbria Crack. That's an appropriate name for that newspaper, isn't it? They want to host the new nuclear reactors for United Kingdom. Man. Business and Whitehall heavyweights. Not the community, but a handful in the community of people that are going to profit. Showed support for West Cumbria, which is a nuclear wasteland by Sellafield, surrounded by farms. With pledges to see if we can get something done. Politicians, academics, and business leaders, when an interest in nuclear power excludes everybody else, and they're going in for the kill. Attended a panel this week staged at the Conservation Party conference. And Britain wants to deploy 24 gigawatts of clean energy. They're not going to deploy nothing. France might deploy something, but Britain's not deploying jack shit. They're not even going to try. They're that incompetent. The government knows better than let nuclear scientists in the United Kingdom actually build a nuclear site. Oh, no, we'll get France to do it. It's okay. We already said France can do it. Geraldine Thomas, no, we'll get it done. First off, it's not going to happen, right? It's posturing. Leaders in Copeland aim to be part of the new nuclear frontier. I just really despise whoever wrote that. In particular, efforts are being made to bring small modular reactors, which is Rolls-Royce, right? to the NDA land neighboring Sellafield, which still has an ongoing nuclear meltdown, was a fuel fabrication facility, was blamed for contaminating the Arctic and the Atlantic. There's still 8 million liters a day of radioactive contaminated water ran over a mixed oxide fuel meltdown in Sellafield, which was called Windscale, by the way. They changed the name after the meltdown because they went out and jacked people from theaters. They couldn't get volunteers from the nuclear universities or nuclear students or nuclear companies to go to the meltdown. So they actually went out with buses, went to the back rows of the theater and stole people from the back rows of the theater to go to the nuclear meltdown and try to put out the nuclear meltdown. Try making that up on your own. So they changed their name to Sellafield after the truth came out. No, that was Windscale. That wasn't us. They got cancer clusters everywhere, particularly with children, and they're trying to blame it on the flu. Actual academic studies trying to blame cancer clusters in Cumbria on the flu. Like, heartless doesn't really describe the nuclear industry. It's heartless, physically heartless. They don't have a heart. The mayor of Copeland called for clarity on Cumbria's place in the plan. We want our chunk of the pie. We don't care if you poison everybody for 100,000 years. Just give us our chunk of the pie. He said, I represent a community where there's huge support, which is, as I showed you earlier, just a couple of businesses and politicians, right, and academics. Where there's huge support, that is in fact crying for new nuclear. Please, we gotta get more nuclear crack. I don't know if I actually heard that one before. They're, in fact, crying out for new nuclear plants because Sellafield just went offline. Now, they're still taking all the fuel. The site is hemorrhaging radiation. It's completely surrounded by farms as far as you can see. Look, what's the timescale you foresee where you will purchase a small modular reactor? And what do we need to do to make sure we get that piece of the pie in Copeland or on the Sellafield site? It's almost like a bad dream that people like that actually exist, eh? Like, they're not out talking to people in the community. There's a couple of business communities. Rolls-Royce, Tom Samson, said both sites north and south of Sellafield were perfect. We've been working with the non-decommission authority for months, exploring across a number of their sites where they could deploy our small modular reactors the fastest. And I think West Cumbria is definitely in that space. It doesn't exist, folks. There's no reason for it to exist on top of that if you just come up with storage for renewables that already exists. If you just admit that it exists and small modular reactors have nowhere to go. And there might be insects in the future. We got a poll tonight. Will the scum nuclear power plant industry eventually exterminate all species, if not stopped soon? And we got 90% plus says yeah. Man, This is not a game, folks. We need heroes on this planet. Don't look for it in sports or Hollywood or celebrities or influencers. It has to be you. How safe is West Burton A as a nuclear power plant? Well, they're all hemorrhaging radiation from the fuel pools. They're all splitting the atoms. Is the site for the UK's first prototype nuclear fusion power station. 50 years later, it's always 50 years, and 50. They figured in about 50 years they'll crack it. So they got temperatures of 150 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures. I'm sorry, 150 million degrees Fahrenheit temperature. So imagine something, your cigarette lighter is 150 million degrees. Do you think you can light your cigarette with that? You think you can pick it up? And so they're going to contain it in, their newest idea was contain it in magnets. Now, if something happens, and they say the reactor will shut down in a few seconds. If you got something in magnets at 150 million degrees running steady, and something breaks, that 150 million degrees is a detonation. That's what a detonation is, 150 million degrees. I don't know if we got anything on the planet that ever got that hot, have we? That could be, if they actually crack it, right, and get it to work, and if something goes wrong, which is likely at 150 million degrees, they got to contain it to boil water to power our homes. It's obviously they're thinking about space travel 100 years down the road. This is what this is all about. But it like nuclear, where they gotta sell it to you some way to get your consent for the governments to give up, to justify giving up huge sums of money to something that's useless, so that they don't come up with solutions for other things in the world, I guess, basically. But 150 million degrees, this is going to be like a hydrogen bomb going off if it... So what, like, especially trying to get there. This is where it's extremely vulnerable. Even if you do manage to get there, it's like everything else. The amount of pieces it takes to make it work, you're talking in the millions. Something breaks and the system goes snap for a second. 150 million degree Fahrenheit is a detonation. That's going to be a huge, that's going to be just the same as a nuclear bomb detonating. Again, they acknowledge that it'll make, so they call Chernobyl the worst nuclear disaster, which is, again, they're not trying to have a conversation when they do that, are they? You see, around 30 people died in Chernobyl or from radiation sickness afterwards. It was 600 helicopter pilots died, for goodness sakes, in the first 2 weeks. All of them, every single one of them. So if they're not going to be honest about that, how could you expect them to be honest about anything else? If you're going to say Chernobyl's worse, and that Chernobyl there was no adverse side effects, 60 people died in the years that followed after Chernobyl, which changed the sex ratio of all males and females worldwide. Well, certainly in Europe, the weapons testing changed worldwide, which meant more males than females, which meant you can't do that without changing the sex ratio of all the species, too. Or does that even matter? I think one of my problems is I really dislike lawyers. So Chernobyl, they closed 9,000 farms after Chernobyl in Ireland and Scotland, United Kingdom, which meant they were supposed to abandon Ireland and Scotland, United Kingdom. When you contaminate 9,000 farms with radiation, you contaminated severely the 9,000 farms. Radiation doesn't fly around looking for farms, which means you contaminated the water supply and the schools and the communities and the entire environment permanently. It was airborne. It was hanging very close to the ground. It would have exterminated a huge percentage of the insects in increments over the first decade even, right? And it's very damaging to teeth when that kind of releases. It's very damaging to all life. Here was one study. You like this one? Chernobyl surpassed any and all terror in The Exorcist, The Shining, The Human Centipede put together, which are all Hollywood fantasies, right? Rather than say you closed 9,000 farms in Ireland and Scotland, but early infant mortality in West Germany before and after Chernobyl, abortions in Italy after Chernobyl, all of these studies, redistribution, resuspension of radionuclides during forest fires and grassland fires in Chernobyl exclusion zone or Europe. As you'll see, cesium fallout from Chernobyl and forest soils, impact on the alpine lake sediment in France. In other words, the lakes in Switzerland, for instance, and Finland were closed for 30 years before they opened them to freshwater fishing after Chernobyl. You still can't eat reindeers in Latvia. A highly radioactive Chernobyl deposit in Scandinavian, highly radioactive Chernobyl fallout in Scandinavian glaciers. Chernobyl's dirty legacy lives on. Thyroid cancers in children and young adults in England after Chernobyl. It's like there's 1,800 illnesses and diseases, not immune deficiency, not just thyroid, which is horrifying because your thyroid is making radioactive hormones. This is permanent. A lot of that gets stored, that don't get used right away, is getting stored in your pituitary gland for use later. Your adrenaline gland. Fallout disposition of Monaco following Chernobyl. Thyroid cancers in Belarus, which is full of orphanages of disfigured children that have been abandoned. Fallout in New York after Chernobyl. Chernobyl impact in Western Europe. Soil plant transfer of plutonium and americium after Chernobyl in Belarus. Syria mountains stuffed with cesiums and strontiums. Accumulation of radioactive cesium in mammals in the Baltic Sea. Resuspension constantly, tropospheric, stratospheric distribution. So when you talk about radioactive iodine and cesium, you're being dishonest. The biggest byproduct of radioactive fallout is curium isotopes. And you need lead shielding 20 times thicker for curium isotopes you do for the plutonium. Chernobyl radiocesium behaviors in catchment lakes in in Cumbria, where they're going to put small modular reactors we covered earlier, were surrounded by farms or polluted for 50 years from Sellafield, which had a meltdown in 1959. Concentrations of radiocesium in Italian wheat. You know what they told the Italians, the same as the Chernobyl, and the same as Ukraine, which is the biggest wheat supplier worldwide, which is a nuclear wasteland, that if the farmers that were complaining, they gave them potassium fertilizer and said that'll stop the plants from uptaking cesium. Even if it was true, it doesn't stop it from uptaking the uranium, plutonium, and americium, neptunium, the thousands of fission products that are going to be in the same sample. They're so dishonest, they're so murderous, and because it happens in increments over time, you can't... See, you can prove that it's happening, but the population can't perceive it or smell it or hear it or feel it or touch it or taste it or pick it up or throw rocks at it. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. You know, my Geiger counter up there is not counting sunshine. Does the doses from Chernobyl accident to the Nordic population via... Why are you doing all of these studies? None of these studies are cheap. The Greek lake fish after Chernobyl. Get a load of this one. Plants sucking up cesium, and the plants are used for drugs, to make drugs. So you got radioactive drugs, chemo, radiation therapy coming from your farmer's field. Canada. Potassium fertilizer and cesium transfer from soil to grass and barley in Sweden. Sweden was done, the farmers were given potassium fertilizer and told that'll stop the plants from sucking up radiation so you can keep growing food. The industry is insane. Like, it's physically insane. It's a physical danger to all species. It's worse than a danger. It's an imminent threat to the survival of the planet and the species and humanity. It shouldn't exist. Its entire legacy is predicated upon deception. Potassium. Every time I hear the word potassium given to farmers, it really upsets me. The influence of post-Chernobyl fallout and birth defects abortion rates in Austria. The cesium, radio cesium, which is British terminology, cesium, through 2 freshwater lakes in Cumbria, which is right alongside of ongoing nuclear meltdown from a mixed oxide reactor in 1959. So they're trying to blame the fallout in Cumbria, next door to a disease factory known as Sellafield. They're trying to blame the radiation there on Chernobyl, folks. There's no doubt Chernobyl showed up there, but it ain't going to be as bad as what's coming out of the disease factory known as Sellafield. Again, look, another study. Food ingestion doses from artificial nuclides in Cumbria's diet 10 years post-Chernobyl. Like, it's almost too much to take sometimes, these lies. I'm going to show you that. Cumbria. Just hang on. Oh, that's not the one I was looking for. It's worse. Hang on. We're almost there. Bloop. My computer's going bloop, 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 bloop. When you put in any search term nuclear into my system's like, I got 200,000. Here we go. Pictures of wind scale and farms. Oh, wind scale is Sellafield, right? It's to me it's just, what am I, like, how is this even possible? Why are you figures so dark? So I showed you all these studies that are blaming Chernobyl, right, around Cumbria, which is right alongside of Sellafield. And what's closer to Sellafield is farms, as far as you can see, surrounding multiple nuclear meltdowns and a disease factory. Surreal, eh? So they're saying that the radiation in the fields is from Chernobyl, not from Sellafield, which is right in the center. Like most every nuclear plant and fuel fabrication facility on the planet is surrounded by farms, right up to the property. Just type in Sellafield and sit back and whore. Hollywood can't terrify you as much as the nuclear industry can when you know the truth about it. And I'm doing a bit better tonight on my throat anyway. I was hoping not to be hacking the night. Practice makes perfect. Radiation doses in counties of the countries in the northern hemisphere from Chernobyl, Ontario, Canada, fallout, grazing economy in North Wales in the wake of Chernobyl. All nuclear power plants, and these are United Kingdom nuclear power plant and reprocessing facility, mixed oxide fuel disease factories. Post-Chernobyl insight for agricultural in Canada. Canada's thousands of miles away, Dana. Yeah, it is, sadly. Intellectual development, mental behavioral disorders in children from Belarus exposed in the uterus following Chernobyl. It was less than 7% were normal of babies that were born just after Chernobyl. Radioactivity in milk consumed in Nigeria 10 years after Chernobyl. Inhalations of radionuclides in agricultural work in areas contaminated, which is the whole planet, right? But Chernobyl is nothing compared to Fukushima, but Chernobyl is brutal. Let's keep her rolling here because you can't get through it all is the problem. Right? You can't get through all the documentation. They say 60 people died in the years after Chernobyl, despite the fact it was 700 helicopter pilots died. First look at UK's first nuclear fusion site, plans at West Burton A power station. Well, that's West Burton power station. Gee. Looks like it's surrounded by farms to me. It's probably just an accident. They actually show you the picture in the story of the site surrounded by farms. And the fusion creates way more tritiated water, for instance, than a normal nuclear disease factory does. And they're prolific. Belarus panics over alleged U.S.-Poland nuclear proposal. Well, Belarus is holding nuclear weapons, which makes them a target, right? Not be such a good idea after all. Oh, I missed that, did I? Might not be such a good idea after all. putting small nuclear reactors in far-flung places is an idiotic idea. Well, these are dirty bombs all over the place. That's what they want to do with small modular reactors. Put them in all the little communities. Make them eat the radiation instead of funding a dump. This is sickening. The Marshall Islands is to receive UN support over nuclear legacy. The worst case scenario right there. The UN is 195 militaries. Eisenhower calls them the military-industrial complex, right? Which is what they are, 195 militaries. That's very worrisome stuff, folks. The last thing the Marshallese Island needs is United Nations as the arbiter. Oh my goodness. I'm going to tickle his throat again tonight. Not much I can do about it. The nuclear nightmare rears its head. So, the Ukraine nuclear power plant is shut down that everybody's talking about. If they have a direct hit on one of the fuel pools, you're going to have multiple nuclear meltdowns going on. These fuel pools they got a lot of reactors, they got a lot of fuel there. It's stored right there on site. It's got decades of it still in fuel pools. They just lost power again yesterday, and they have 16 generators on that site, right? But they've had a lot of damage done everywhere around it. So we talked about this quite a bit over the last number of months, obviously. Where you lose external power, you can have an event. And if you damage the transformers at the site, you can have all the generators you want. You can't send the power. And so one well-placed shell will cause multiple nuclear meltdowns. Which of these Halloween costumes will you and or your child be in 2022? A superhero? Or a prince or princess? So remember all Walt Disney films about, cartoons about the prince and the princess, and how they come out on the balconies and wave to the adoring fans and crowds, and the prince goes down and gives his jacket to the hobbler with only one leg, and blah, 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 right? This is nonsense. It's not just fantasies, it's dangerous fantasies being pumped into children. A lot of children are growing up looking for their prince and princesses. And they'll settle for nothing less. You know, going around kissing frogs. Superheroes, what? Like Spider-Man, like the Hulk, like Superman, all created by the nuclear industry to indoctrinate your children. What happens if Vladimir Putin, feeling more and more like a cornered rat in Ukraine, actually uses a tactical nuclear weapon against Ukrainian troops, which is NATO troops, right? Because NATO is supplying them. They wouldn't exist if it wasn't for NATO. Is this a red line crossed that would demand a direct American response? How does America... America's supplying them with weapons and funding and everything else, but how would that be justification for another war? A nuclear war exchange? What if the radiation from such a weapon drifts over in a NATO country, which NATO had said would be considered an attack upon a NATO country, which under the NATO doctrine, whatever it was, 5.5, whatever resolution, would warrant an immediate nuclear retaliation. This is why NATO's not supposed to exist. That they're even suggesting that or thinking about something like that is more than enough reason for sanity to prevail and dissolve this antiquated, hideous, out-of-control bully known as NATO. U.S. government tips Ghana to be the hub of nuclear energy in Africa. And what did they show you? A nuclear power plant surrounded by farms. And a white man surrounded by impoverished black people. The forgotten Dartmoor mine, red hot with radioactivity from 1919. 1919. When you wore your clothes for 40 days straight, never took a shower, and wiped your bum wet. Even today, 1990, 100 years later, one of the academic community went there last year into the mine, and it's so toxic, so much radioactivity, and it's accessible to all kinds of unsuspecting people. People are being advised to stay away from the site because of the health effects of radiation. The knotted gun statue in front of UN headquarters. One of the first things UN done was flatten North Korea, right? The endless war on North Korea is still ongoing. Land, sea, and air embargo for over 60 years. They burnt every community, which is collective punishment, by the way. It's just crimes against humanity, 100%, with napalm from Monsanto, UN headquarters. Why are people quoting UN? Well, because they run the planet. They own the planet. They control the planet now. They're like a big plague on our planet. It's called United Nations. Hi, everybody. Well, I figured if I calm my voice down, I can make it through. So we kind of skipped a few stories because there's so many lies. This is crazy. But what I'm talking about is there's so many lies in each story. I'll try to cover every lie. Which is madness. The idea was basically, I got 5 shows ready to go. And each show is stuffed full of a 24-hour cycle of news on nuclear. And that each story has multiple lies into it. Complete 100%, it's got a lot of, I don't cover every lie. I cover just the outrageous ones in each story. You can't cover everything. Well, you could. We talked about this before, where what I should be doing for a month straight is just go through the news cycle live each day. And you're talking 8-9 hours of work. And do that each day and go through every story and just walk it through the whole cycle that I go through each day. And probably nobody will watch a single entire show. But what you'll see is this. This is what I'm doing anyway. If I stream it, it doesn't really make that much difference, right? Because I do it, and then I do another 2-hour show to tell all the lies. So I save myself 2 hours work is what I would do. Basically. So instead of doing like 14 hours work a day, I only do 12. I do more than that, obviously, but and at the same time, well, first off, you only get better every day, right? John M. donated 100. Well, I need a jacket. Because last year we almost died in the winter out on the trail. There was some seriously cold days out there. And my gloves are just ragged. And I like to get, a cheap jacket won't do the trick. We got, Stephen Young donated 50. So really appreciate that. And we got, the pump showed up on Friday for the motor, which is 2 weeks early, right? The fuel pump for the outboard motor. We had rain on Friday. And Saturday, I just couldn't do anything. I was still hacking my guts. Today's a pretty good day, but get ready for the show tonight and still trying to recover, right? You want to try to take a couple of days off. I felt guilty all day yesterday and today. It's about a 5-hour job altogether. You got to pull off the fuel rail. You got to pull the injectors out. And you got to pull off the manifold. You got to take off all the casement on the lower part of the engine first, blah, blah, blah. And I ordered in new bolts for that. It took over a year for the extra bolts to show up. And they showed up last month. And when I put it back together, I can stick them in there. It makes me sick just thinking about it. It's a lot of work, man. It's a lot of tricky work. And you got to hope none of the gaskets are damaged. They usually hold pretty good. I've done this years ago when I was younger. It wasn't quite a bit, right? And we got all the tools, right, which is awesome to do it. It just makes me sick to my guts thinking about it. But I'm desperate to get back out on the ocean. It's hard to appreciate it. How desperate I am to get back out on the ocean. It's going to be cold out there because it's late fall now here. And we're struggling. It's been an absurdly tough year. An absurdly tough year. Everything went wrong. And it started off with kidney stones on my end, right? And the list goes on. Okay, so I guess that's it for tonight, is it? Let's come over to the poll one more time. Here, poll. That's not the one. That's the one, though. Will the scum nuclear power plant industry eventually exterminate all species, if not stop soon? We got 46 votes, 91% of the people understood what we're talking about and voted appropriately. We thank everybody for the participation. The poll means a lot to me. It costs us very little and goes a long way. Yeah, well, like you say, I'm going to have to go out and tilt the engine back up and put a drop blanket underneath it in case anything falls out. I can find it because there's grass underneath it. If the weather's good tomorrow, I'm going to go out and... It makes me sick just thinking about it. And change the fuel pump. I'll feel better once it's done. I'll shoot a bunch of videos for something to do. Maybe it'll save somebody else a headache down the road. Hope everybody has a great night, great day tomorrow. And we'll see everybody tomorrow night, I guess. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you made it this far. I gotta go back in to the cancer doctor to get imaging. We gotta do an MRI. It'll burn me again. They're saying it's not in the bowels for sure, he said. The kidney stone is gone for sure on top of that. That don't mean a new one can't come and show up. And it was a great show tonight. I enjoyed the show. And I love you folks out there. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. Tomorrow night we're going to cover all kinds of die-offs and insects. It's going to be a great time. Get the kids together. Get a bunch of popcorn and stuff like that. Sit, kick back, and we'll get you up to speed. Be a huge, wonderful time. Thanks, Fukushima. Due to the Fukushima radioactive fallout, folks. That's why all the whales at the beginning I showed you are dying. Yeah. I'll see everybody tomorrow night. My throat's much better than Thursday's show, but it's still pretty tough, eh? I'm definitely dying out here as we say goodnight. So, good night. I'll see everybody tomorrow night. Take care, folks. Oh my God.